Okay, so you want to buy a cruise ship, not a boat, a city that floats. Here's $2 billion, which is the real price of the biggest passenger ship ever built, the Icon of the Seas. For that money, you get a steel island longer than 4 football fields, 20 decks tall, with 8 separate neighborhoods, 7 pools, the largest water park ever put on a ship, and room for 7,600 people who, for a week, cannot leave. Congratulations. You now own the single most expensive machine in the travel business. It costs more than a nuclear submarine, and it's pointed straight at families from Ohio. Here's the strange part. Before one guest walks up the ramp, this thing burns more than $1 million a day just to sit in the water and exist. And somehow, that's the good news. Because run properly, a ship like this is one of the most profitable objects a person can own. Most people who try to run one are bankrupt by minute 24. Your $2 billion is on the screen. Let's watch what the ocean does to it. By the end of this, you'll understand 5 things. Why a $2 billion ship is really a shopping mall with the exits locked, and why you sell the ticket at a loss on purpose. What it actually costs to keep a floating town alive for a single day, down to the fuel and the toilets. How a drink that costs you $1.10, 1 casino, and 1 private island pay for the entire machine. The paperwork trick that lets a company this size pay a tax rate lower than the teenager making espresso on deck 5. And then, at the final audit, the exact playbook for how you turn all of this into a profit instead of a shipwreck. The bankroll doesn't move yet. Let it sit there. That stillness is the last calm you get. First, though, you have to actually buy the thing, and you can't. Not off a shelf. There's no lot where $2 billion ships sit waiting for a buyer. Only 4 shipyards on the whole planet can build one this size, all of them in Europe, and they're booked years deep. Ordering the Icon of the Seas took about 7 years from the day the contract was signed to the day it first sailed. And you don't pay cash, because almost nobody on Earth has $2 billion in loose change. Instead, the money comes together like a small treaty. You put down maybe 5 or 10% to hold your slot, then hand over more as the ship hits milestones, when they cut the first steel, when they lay the keel, when they float the hull out of the shed. By the time it's finished, you've paid perhaps 1/5 of the price out of your own pocket. And where does the other 80% come from? A European government. Those shipyards are national treasures full of local jobs. So countries like Finland and Germany will personally guarantee the loan, just to make sure the order lands at home. So buying a cruise ship works less like a purchase and more like a slow-motion treaty between a giant company and a foreign state. And the moment you take the keys, you own a mountain of debt that will shadow this ship for the next 30 years. So, drop the word ship. A ship is supposed to take you somewhere. This one is built to keep you exactly where you are, spending. Every inch of a modern megaship is designed to make sure you never want to get off. And, more importantly, that when you finally do get off, you step onto land the company also owns. It's a shopping mall that floats with 1 door, and the door only opens where the owner decides. What you're really selling is a captive crowd of 7,000 people, 3 meals a day, 7 days straight, with nowhere else on Earth to spend $1. The sea does one job here. It's the wall that keeps the wallets in. Before you spend another $1, you should know who you're actually selling to, because it isn't quite who most people picture. More than half the people on a big cruise are between 50 and 70 years old. Retirees mostly, with the time, the savings, and a deep love of not having to think. That last part is the real product. Convenience. On a cruise, you visit 5 countries and unpack once. You never repack a suitcase, and you never once have to find a taxi in a language you don't speak. The ship is the hotel, the restaurant, the theater, and the travel agent all at once, and it does the planning so the passenger doesn't have to. Sell the young crowd the water slides and the party. Sell the older crowd the promise that nothing on this trip will ever be their problem. Either way, you've sold a week where the customer's only job is to spend. And the ticket you sell them is a trick in itself. A cruise line will happily sell you a week on this ship for around $70 a night. $70. For that, you get a bed, a room, transport across hundreds of miles of ocean, and all the food you can carry. You couldn't rent a highway motel for that. So how does a $2 billion machine survive on motel prices? It doesn't. Not on the ticket. The ticket isn't the product. It's the bait that gets a paying customer through the 1 door and out to sea, where the real selling starts. But before we get to how the money comes back, look at what it costs you just to open the doors each morning. Start with fuel, the most frightening line on the whole page, because its price swings with every war and every headline. An older ship, the ordinary diesel kind, drinks around 66,000 gallons of fuel a day. That's roughly 250 tons of it burned every single day, just to move and keep the lights on. The Icon is cleverer. It runs on natural gas, which burns cleaner, and it carries the stuff in 2 tanks so enormous that each one, empty, weighs 300 tons. Fill it up, and a single refuel can cost you more than $5 million. Across its whole fleet, Royal Caribbean spends over $1 billion a year on fuel alone. And there's a dirty little footnote to the clean fuel. That natural gas leaks a bit of unburned methane into the sky as it goes, and methane is a far worse greenhouse gas than the stuff it replaced, so the green ship isn't quite as green as the brochure. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today you just paid for fuel, and the meter is already running. Then come the bills nobody pictures when they dream about owning a cruise ship. Every couple of years, the ship has to be hauled out of the water for a deep service called a dry dock, and a routine one runs anywhere from $2 to $10 million. Every so often you gut the thing and rebuild it for a midlife makeover, and one of those on a sister ship cost $165 million in a single stretch. You insure the hull and everything that can possibly go wrong on it, which for a $2 billion asset runs several million a year by itself. Every time the ship touches a port, it pays to park, charged by its own weight, plus a tax on every passenger's head, plus health inspectors who can bill you $24,000 just to walk your kitchens. None of these numbers is big enough to scare you on its own. That's exactly the trap. In this business, the budget doesn't die from one giant blow. It bleeds out from 100 small cuts. And underneath all of it sits the debt, the largest monster on the ledger. Remember, you borrowed most of that $2 billion, and you weren't alone. The whole industry loaded up on loans to survive the years it couldn't sail, and now the interest never sleeps. Royal Caribbean by itself pays well over $1 billion a year just in interest on what it owes. Think about what that does to your one ship. Before it earns a cent of real profit, it has to fill every cabin, then cram extra bodies into the family rooms, sailing more than 100% full, only to cover the interest. Leave a cabin empty, and the bank still charges you interest on it anyway. Every dark window is money leaking the wrong way. This is why a cruise ship can never sail half full and live. So take a breath and look at your bankroll. You're not even 10 minutes in, and every line on that ledger is already red. Fuel, food, insurance, interest, a small army of crew, all of it draining out before a single passenger has handed you a cent. This is where most people who buy a ship quietly go under, buried by the costs before the fun even starts. So, why does anyone do it? Because the second that ship fills up with people, it stops being a money pit and turns into one of the greatest cash machines ever put to sea. You just have to survive long enough to flip the switch. So, let's go find the switch. Now cruise ships come in 3 sizes, and which one you pick decides what kind of owner you become. Small, an old ship somebody else is finished with. When the industry panics, these get sold for scrap by the pound. One perfectly usable ship went to a Turkish breaking yard for $11 million, about what a single fancy suite costs to build. Cheap to buy, a coffin to run. Medium, a sensible new ship, a few $100 million, the family sedan of the sea. Large, the $2 billion record breaker you're standing on. You take the medium one. Everybody takes the medium one. But hold that thought, because Royal Caribbean deliberately took the big one, and by the end, you'll see whether that was genius or madness. And this is why they took it. Royal Caribbean spent $2 billion making the ship itself the reason to come. The Icon is less a boat than a theme park that floats. There's a glass dome at the front the size of a small stadium, with a 55-foot waterfall inside it and acrobats flying through the mist. There's the biggest water park ever built at sea, 6 record-breaking slides, including the steepest drop ever put on a ship. 8 separate neighborhoods, each with its own mood, so a family of 4 can scatter all day and feel like they're on 4 different holidays. The whole thing is engineered, so the destination stops mattering. Nobody's really sailing to the Bahamas anymore. They're sailing to the Icon, and the Bahamas just happens to be parked outside the window. Build a ship people would pay to visit even if it never left the dock, and you've solved the hardest problem in the business before you sell a single ticket. So you've bought your floating city and paid to fuel it. Now you have to feed it, and that's a hidden operation the passengers never see. Below the pretty decks runs a corridor the crew nicknamed the I-95, a highway that stretches the entire length of the ship, where forklifts and hundreds of crew move 50 tons of food a week without a single guest noticing. On turnaround day, when one set of passengers leaves and the next arrives, the ship loads 600,000 pounds of food in about an 8-hour window. If one forklift is late, 7,600 people don't eat. 30,000 meals a day come out of kitchens on a rocking floor, cooked by people you'll never meet, living in cabins below the waterline. The vacation upstairs only works because a second, invisible city runs flat out downstairs. And turnaround itself is a war measured in hours. In one morning, the crew strips and remakes every one of the ship's roughly 2,700 cabins, hauls off a week's worth of trash, and loads 500 pallets of fresh supplies, all before the next 7,000 guests walk up the ramp. The ship even makes its own fresh water, pulling it straight from the sea and cleaning it at a rate of 150,000 liters an hour. Because you can't run a hose out to a town in the middle of the Atlantic. Power, water, food, waste, medicine, security, this ship carries all of it, all the time, hundreds of miles from the nearest help. Feeding all of that is a factory in disguise. One person on board does almost nothing but order the groceries, on a budget of about $1 million a week for 7 days of eating. When more kids are booked, he just orders more chicken fingers. There's a butcher shop below deck working through 15,000 pounds of beef a week. There's a bakery making dozens of kinds of bread from scratch. There are 36 separate kitchens scattered around the ship, and lobster night alone burns through a couple of 1,000 pounds of tails. Before the dinner rush, a head chef tastes every dish and signs off on it, because 6,000 people are about to sit down at the same time, and there is no running to the store if something's wrong. You're in the middle of the ocean. Whatever's in the freezer is all there is. And every one of those departments is another payroll you're covering, whether the ship sails full or empty. Down here are whole teams you'd never guess existed. 6 engines, each the size of a house, push the ship through the water, steered not by a wheel, but by giant pods under the hull that spin a full circle to turn it. Down in the belly, a whole team does nothing but handle waste, because a floating town of 10,000 people makes a mountain of garbage a week, and by law, almost none of it can go over the side. They crush thousands of pounds of glass and burn what they can. Every drop of dirty water, from the sinks and yes, from the toilets, runs through a treatment plant and comes out clean enough to be nearly drinkable. All of it. So the ship leaves no trail behind it in the water. When a company cuts a corner on that, and some have, the punishment is savage, and we'll get to it before the end. And getting this much steel to move at all is a slow, delicate business. Easing the Icon out of port is a careful dance between the bridge and the engine room. 4 thrusters at the bow, nudging the front sideways. 3 spinning pods at the stern, pulling the ship instead of pushing it. Steering is maybe a tenth of the captain's job. The rest is running a floating government of 2,000 people who all answer, in the end, to him. And the whole apparatus exists, so a family on deck 15 can watch Miami slide away with a drink in hand, never once wondering how a building the size of a skyscraper just left the dock sideways. A city this size even has to police itself and heal itself. There's a medical center on board, a security team, and, since COVID, whole decks that can be sealed off to quarantine the sick. Out past 12 miles, the captain is very nearly the law, and real help is hours away by helicopter. Everyone on board knows it, even if the guests never think about it. So, along with the hotel and the shopping mall, you're running a small city's emergency services and paying for them whether anyone ever needs them or not. So, who keeps 7,000 strangers happy for a week without letting them get bored? An army you never see. The ship runs Broadway-scale shows, an ice rink, and an aerial theater, staffed by real talent, divers and aerialists who fly over the crowd on wires, performing 8 times a week for 11 months straight without a single day off. And here's the piece that makes the whole payroll work. Almost none of these people are paid American wages. The crew is hired mostly from the Philippines and Indonesia on contracts that run 6 to 9 months of 10 and 12-hour days with no weekends. A cabin steward's base wage can be $400 a month. The captain and the senior engineers earn a comfortable Western salary, sure, but the thousands of people actually running the hotel earn a fraction of what the same job pays on land. That gap between what the work is worth and what it's paid is a huge part of why this business prints money. The ship floats on cheap labor as much as it floats on water. Take the aerialist who flies in those shows. She beat thousands of dancers for the spot, trained for months on land, and now she performs over a live crowd on a moving stage, correcting for the roll of the ship in real time so a wave doesn't throw her into the rigging. She'll run that routine hundreds of times on one contract, bruised in a fresh spot most nights, and go home only for a real emergency. For all of it, she earns a small fraction of what the same act pays on Broadway. The show looks effortless. That's the whole job. And all those people live in a second hidden ship below the waterline. Crew cabins, 2 to a room, no windows. Their own mess halls, their own shop, even their own bar tucked down on a lower deck. A whole society running underneath the holiday. Most passengers never set foot in a crew corridor, never wonder where the 2,000 people making their beds and cooking their dinners actually sleep. The entire magic upstairs depends on that world staying out of sight. If a guest can see how the trick works, the trick has already failed. So, look at your bankroll one more time, because by now it's a horror show. You've bought a $2 billion ship, fueled it, fed it, staffed it, and sailed it out of Miami, and so far you have made exactly nothing. This is the moment the whole business has been building toward. If the ticket loses money, the profit has to be hiding somewhere on this boat, and it is. It lives in the 90 feet between your cabin and the pool. One number runs this whole industry. For every dollar a passenger spends getting onto the boat, they spend about another 43 cents once they're aboard. And that second pile is where almost all the profit hides. The ticket is bait, the boat is the trap. Start with the drink. A cocktail costs the company about $1.10 in actual liquor. They sell it for $14. They'll also sell you an unlimited drinks package for around $100 a day. And the cruelty of that package is the math. To break even, you'd have to knock back 8 cocktails a day, every day for a week, which they know you can't, because they hold the data on exactly when people give up. Then the casino. The moment the ship crosses 12 miles offshore, it's in international waters, where no country's gambling rules apply. So the machines are allowed to pay out less than any casino on land legally could. Then the internet, beamed down from satellites and sold to you at $25 a day, on a system that becomes almost pure profit the second it's switched on. And they've removed the one thing that makes people stop spending, the moment of paying. Nobody on this ship carries cash or reaches for a card. Your room key or a wristband is your wallet, linked straight to your account, and every drink and every bet just gets waved onto the tab. You never see a running total until the last morning, when the full bill slides under your door and the vacation math finally catches up with you. That design is deliberate. It's the oldest trick in the casino playbook, moved out to sea. Take away the small sting of paying, and people pay a great deal more. And the layout of the ship is a weapon too. The same way a casino hides its exits and a furniture store winds you slowly past every couch, a cruise ship is built to float you past its shops on the way to anything you actually want. The walk from your cabin to dinner runs you through the mall. The path to the pool takes you by the bar. You're never more than a minute from something to buy, and the designers made sure of it. And that's only the top of the menu. The main dining is already included, so they build fancier restaurants right beside it and charge $40 to $60 a head just to walk in. The spa is theirs. So are the photographers and the shops selling everything from watches to art. Even the trips ashore are a toll booth. Book a snorkeling tour through the cruise line, and the local guide who actually runs it might keep only half. The rest is the lines cut for handing over a customer it already had trapped on the boat. On land, a mall at least pretends to have competition, a food court with rival stands. Here, every shop on the ship has the same owner. You. There's no walking out to find a better price, because outside is the Atlantic. The house always wins here, because the house is the only game in the building. And then there's the tip. Every passenger is charged around $16 to $20 a day, automatically, and it's labeled a gratuity. It sounds like a tip. Really, it's how the crew gets paid. That $400 base wage for the person cleaning your cabin gets topped up to something a human being can live on by this daily charge on your bill. So, when the company tells you the gratuity is optional, be clear about what's actually optional. The housekeeper's salary. So the passenger pays for the cruise, and then, without ever realizing it, the passenger pays the staff. But the greatest trick in this entire business isn't on the ship at all. It's the private island. For most of cruise history, the day the ship reached port was the day the money leaked out. Passengers wandered off into some local town and spent their cash at a stranger's taco stand and somebody else's boat tour, and every one of those dollars belonged to someone who wasn't you. So the big lines did the ruthless, obvious thing. They bought the destination. Royal Caribbean took a scrubby stretch of the Bahamas, spent $250 million turning it into a private beach resort called Perfect Day at Coco Cay. And now the ship docks at an island where the company owns the sand, the loungers, the drinks, and the price on every single one. A single cabana on that beach can rent for $2,000 a day. And the payoff. That one island is estimated to earn the company around $545 million a year, and it earned back the whole $250 million build in under 6 months. A money printing machine wrapped in a beach, walled off by water so nobody can wander off and spend a dollar anywhere else. Look at your ledger now. For the first time all day, the line's green. $2 billion went out, but almost $2.75 million a day is coming back. This is the part where owning a cruise ship feels like pure genius. Hold on to that feeling. And it worked so well that it kicked off a land grab. Carnival watched Royal Caribbean's island print money and spent $600 million building its own, called Celebration Key, which pulled in over 2 million visitors in its very first year. Royal Caribbean is already building the next one in Mexico. On a stretch of coast it locked up in a deal worth nearly $300 million. Every big line now wants its own walled beach. And the towns next door can only watch, because the whole point of the private island is that the tourist money, which used to flow into local shops and taxis, now stays inside the company's fence. The towns next door lose the tourist money they used to count on, and the company keeps every cent of it behind the fence. Now you're making real money, which means your next job is keeping it away from the tax man. And this is where a cruise company stops being a travel business and becomes a magic trick. Your ship sails out of Miami, packed with Americans, run by a company headquartered in Florida. But look at the back of the boat. It flies the flag of the Bahamas. On paper, the company that owns it is registered in Liberia. Carnival, the biggest rival, is registered in Panama. None of these ships, in any honest sense, belong to the little countries whose flags they wear. They wear them for one reason. An old line in the American tax code says a foreign shipping company owes no American income tax on the money it makes carrying people across the sea. So, a business pulling in billions can pay almost nothing. In one recent year, Carnival's effective tax rate came out to 0.7% on billions of dollars in profit. The barista pouring your latte on deck, 5 pays a higher rate than the billion-dollar company she works for. That foreign flag has one funny side effect. An American law from 1886 says a foreign ship can't carry passengers straight from one American port to another without stopping somewhere foreign along the way. That single rule is why your Caribbean cruise out of Miami has to touch the Bahamas, and why an Alaskan cruise has to duck into Canada. Get off early at the wrong port and break the chain, and there's a fine of nearly $1,000 a head, which the cruise line will happily bill straight to your onboard account. And here's the part that should make you laugh, or wince, depending on the kind of day you're having. These companies live offshore to skip the tax bill, but they still expect the taxpayer to save them. When a Carnival ship called the Splendor caught fire and went dead in the water off California, the United States Navy and Coast Guard came running, flew in supplies, and helped haul thousands of stranded passengers home, at a cost to the American public of nearly $1.9 million. But when the tax bill arrives, the company is suddenly a proud son of Panama. Heads, the company wins. Tails, the public pays. And then the pandemic came. The industry went begging for a bailout. And that very same offshore address is the reason they didn't qualify for one. The ghost ship cuts both ways. Which brings us to the part of every episode where we count the bodies. Welcome to the graveyard. Because everything I've shown you, the markups, the island, the tax trick, all of it runs beautifully, right until the ocean has an opinion. First grave, the Costa Concordia. In 2012, a captain steered a giant cruise ship in close to an Italian island to show off, and put it on the rocks. 32 people died. The ship had cost around $600 million to build, and it became the most expensive shipwreck in history. Between the salvage, the lawsuits, and the scrapping, that one evening cost over $2 billion. That's your whole ship. The entire $2 billion gone over a single show-off turn. Second grave, no rocks this time, just a virus. When COVID shut the world down, these ships became the worst place on Earth to be, and the most expensive thing on Earth to own, because an empty ship still costs a fortune to keep floating. Carnival lost $4.4 billion in a single quarter. It was bleeding $650 million a month, with the ships tied up doing nothing, and it began sending perfectly good ships to the scrapyard just to stop the pain. That's mine at 24, told you. And it doesn't take a catastrophe this size to draw blood. One engine fire on the Carnival Triumph left 5,000 people drifting for days with no power and no working toilets. The press called it the poop cruise, and fixing that weakness across the fleet cost the company hundreds of millions. Get caught dumping waste in the ocean to save a little money, the way more than one line has, and a single penalty can hit $40 million. And those are only the disasters that make the news. Quieter ones happen all the time. A norovirus outbreak that shuts a ship down. A passenger who needs a helicopter off the deck at 2 a.m. for a bill that can top $200,000. One bad captain, or one bad year, and the most profitable machine in travel turns into $2 billion of dead weight overnight. So, who actually wins this game, if the downside is that ugly? There are really 3 ways to play it, and picking one is the whole job of an owner. Carnival plays volume, cheap tickets, older ships, packed to the rails, making its real money on an ocean of beer and burgers from a celebrity chef. Norwegian plays upmarket, higher fares, thinner crowds, and a secret luxury zone called the Haven. A private ship within the ship for the richest guests, walled off from the very crowds they paid to escape. It even dangles a promotion called Free at Sea, a pile of perks that sound generous until you read the fine print, where the free dinner is 2 meals and the free Wi-Fi runs dry by lunch. And Royal Caribbean plays spectacle, spending $2 billion on a ship so ridiculous that the ship itself becomes the vacation. The proof is in the price. For an identical week in the identical Caribbean, the Icon of the Seas charges around 60% more than Royal Caribbean's own older ships, and people pay it without blinking. The maniac who overspent on the biggest, silliest boat is charging the fattest prices and posting the fattest profits. Overspending, it turns out, was the strategy. And the room left to grow is the surprising part. Only about 1/3 of Americans have ever set foot on a cruise, which the industry sees as room to keep growing for decades. And once the ships came back from the pandemic, demand blew straight past the old record. After 2 years docked, The lines that survived found themselves with fewer rivals and a customer base that now books earlier and pays more than it did before the shutdown. So, pull back for a second and look at the shape of the whole thing, because it's stranger than it seems. On this channel, most businesses make money the boring way. You own the thing works, the cash comes in. A cruise ship plays a different game. On paper, the economics are close to flawless. The margins beat almost any hotel, and they're roughly 10 times fatter than the airlines flying over the very same water. But every bit of it, each clever markup and each offshore dollar, is balanced on one calm assumption, that nothing goes badly wrong today. Underneath that flawless spreadsheet, you're really just running one enormous bet that the sea stays boring for another week. Run one full week through the machine and watch what happens. 7,000 people come aboard. The tickets alone bring in somewhere around $13 million for the week. Then the ship goes to work on them. The drinks, the casino, the Wi-Fi, the excursions, the steak dinners, the photos, another $6 million or so, squeezed out over 7 days. Nearly $20 million a week from one ship, from one load of passengers, and then it swings back into Miami and does the whole thing over again, 52 times a year. So how do you actually win at this instead of ending up in the graveyard? The people who get rich here all follow the same 5 rules, and now you know enough to run them. Rule 1, go big. The bigger and more ridiculous the ship, the more you can charge. Because at that size, the ship stops being transport and becomes the destination people are paying to visit. Rule 2, lose money on the ticket on purpose. Price it cheap, fill every cabin, and make your real profit in the 90 feet between the bed and the bar. Rule 3, own both ends of the trip. Own every shop on the ship, then own the island at the other end, so not $1 of a passenger's week ever leaves your fence. Rule 4, fly the right flag. Register the company offshore, pay almost nothing in tax, and hire your crew from wherever wages are lowest. And Rule 5, the one that separates the winners from the corpses, never bet the whole company on one hole. Own a fleet big enough that when the ocean finally takes a ship, and one day it will, you can lose that one hull and barely feel it. Time for the final audit, and this is the number that matters. Your one ship brings in close to $2.75 million a day and burns about $1.25 million. That's roughly $1.5 million a day in gross margin before the debt and before the tax you barely pay. Over a full year, a ship like this throws off something like $240 million in operating profit. It pays for itself in 8 to 10 years, and then keeps sailing for 20 more, and those last 2 decades are almost pure gravy. Even before the pandemic, a single 7-day cruise cleared roughly $290 of profit per passenger, better than a night at a Hilton on a customer who's trapped and drinking for a week instead of checking out in the morning. Now stack 40 of them together and run all 5 rules at once, and you get Royal Caribbean's comeback year. A profit of $4.3 billion, while the airlines flying over the same ocean scrape by on a couple of pennies per dollar. So the stamp comes down, and this time it's green. The verdict is buy. Buy the biggest ship you can, fill it cheap, sell everything once they're aboard, own the beach they land on, fly a flag of convenience, and above all, own enough ships that one bad day at sea can't sink the whole company. Do all 5, and a cruise ship is one of the most reliable money machines on the planet. Skip that last rule, bet it all on a single hole, and you're one reef away from the graveyard. Owning a cruise ship might be the best business on the planet. You just have to own more than one. The comments are the shareholder meeting. So tell me, would you bet $2 billion on the ocean staying calm?